The city never slept, but Marcus Ellington wished it would. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, endless lights stretched across the skyline like artificial stars. Luxury towers pierced the night sky, streams of traffic painted red and white ribbons far below. The view was breathtaking. It was powerful. It was also painfully empty. Marcus stood barefoot on cold marble flooring. A crystal glass rested loosely in his hand. The whiskey inside had long since lost its strength. The melting ice had diluted everything. Somehow, that felt familiar. Years earlier, this view had represented victory. It had symbolized success, ambition, and achievement. Now it felt like a beautiful prison made of glass and gold. Behind him, laughter drifted through the enormous penthouse. The celebration remained alive, expensive perfume mixed with aged wine and polished wood. Soft music floated through the air. Every detail had been planned perfectly. Every guest had been selected carefully. Every smile seemed rehearsed. Marcus took another sip and felt nothing. The realization settled deeper inside him. Success had given him everything except peace. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. He already knew who it belonged to. Bianca moved toward him with graceful confidence. Her designer gown shimmered beneath the lights. Her heels clicked softly against the marble. She rested a hand on his arm and smiled. She told him everyone was looking for him. The party belonged to him. The guests had come for him. Marcus repeated her words quietly. His party, his guests, his celebration. Yet none of it felt personal anymore. He studied her face carefully. Everything appeared flawless. Her makeup was perfect. Her posture was perfect. Her smile was perfect. Then he asked a simple question. If everything disappeared tomorrow, would she still remain beside him? The smile on her face hesitated briefly. She laughed lightly and avoided the question. Marcus noticed the pause immediately. It lasted only seconds. Still, it revealed everything. Her answer never came. Instead, she spoke about how powerful men never truly fall. They simply control the way they land. Marcus nodded slowly. That was strategy. It was not love. Bianca returned to the crowd. Her confidence returned with every step. Marcus turned back toward the city lights. Inside the penthouse, conversations blended into a familiar pattern. Ambition disguised itself as friendship. Opportunity disguised itself as admiration. Every interaction felt predictable. Every conversation followed the same script. A politician wanted support. A businessman wanted access. Someone wanted attention. Someone wanted favors. Nothing surprised him anymore. Later, Marcus finally stepped back into the celebration. The room changed instantly. Heads turned toward him, smiles widened. Conversations paused. A wealthy investor approached eagerly and praised his latest business deal. Others quickly joined. They spoke about profits, acquisitions, and expansion. They called him brilliant. They called him visionary. They called him unstoppable. Nobody mentioned the workers who lost jobs. Nobody mentioned the personal sacrifices. Nobody cared about the cost. Marcus listened politely while feeling completely disconnected. Across the room, several women glanced toward him. Their interest appeared immediate. He recognized that look. He had seen it countless times. It was not curiosity. It was opportunity. He moved through the crowd like a stranger attending his own event. He smiled when necessary. He answered questions. He shook hands. Inside, he felt increasingly trapped. The celebration reached its peak. Music grew louder. Conversations became wilder. Champagne flowed freely. Marcus stood near the bar, watching everything unfold. Wealth surrounded him. Power surrounded him. Yet genuine connection remained absent. His assistant, Malcolm, eventually approached with important news. Several board members had arrived. They were waiting in a private lounge. Even tonight, business demanded attention. Marcus walked away from the party and entered the private room. The atmosphere changed immediately. The laughter disappeared. Numbers replaced conversations. Projections replaced emotions. Powerful executives discussed industries worth billions. Marcus spoke with precision and authority. Everyone admired him. Everyone respected him. Everyone believed he was untouchable. The word echoed repeatedly inside his mind. Untouchable. But as the meeting ended, the word transformed into something else. Alone. Hours later, the final guests departed. Luxury vehicles disappeared into the darkness. Staff quietly cleaned the remains of excess. Empty glasses covered tables. Forgotten conversations lingered in the air. Marcus returned to the window where the evening had begun. The city remained unchanged. Malcolm approached and explained tomorrow's schedule. Calls, meetings, interviews, decisions, responsibilities. Marcus interrupted him immediately. Cancel everything. Malcolm stared in surprise. He rarely questioned instructions. This time he hesitated. Marcus remained silent for several moments. His reflection stared back from the glass. A man with everything. A man with nothing. Finally, he asked a strange question. What would it feel like to become invisible? What would it feel like to enter a room where nobody recognized his name? Nobody expected favors. Nobody wanted money. Nobody cared about status. Malcolm admitted he had never considered such a thing. Marcus confessed that he thought about it constantly. For the first time in years, he wanted to be valued without the burden of wealth and reputation. The silence between them grew heavier. Then Marcus spoke words that shocked even himself. He wanted to disappear. Not forever, just long enough to discover who he really was. Malcolm warned him about consequences. The company needed him. The media would panic. Questions would follow. Marcus listened carefully before answering. The company would survive. It always had. The real question concerned himself. Would he survive without the identity he had built? He honestly did not know. Yet he needed the answer. As the city continued its endless rhythm, Marcus Ellington made a decision nobody expected. He would walk away from power. He would walk away from status. He would walk away from the life that defined him. Somewhere beyond skyscrapers and boardrooms, another life waited quietly. A place where nobody knew his name. A place where wealth meant nothing. A place where the man who seemed to have everything was about to discover what he had truly been missing. And before dawn arrived, Marcus took the first step toward a future that would change everything. Marcus left before sunrise. There were no announcements, no press conferences, no dramatic farewells. Only silence. The city remained asleep as a black SUV rolled away from the underground garage beneath his tower. Thick morning haze covered the streets. The skyscrapers looked distant and cold. Inside the vehicle, Marcus wore faded jeans, worn boots, and a plain shirt. No tailored suit, no expensive watch, no symbols of power. Beside him sat a small duffel bag containing only necessities. Malcolm occupied the front seat. His discomfort filled the vehicle. He finally broke the silence and called the plan reckless. Marcus smiled faintly. That was exactly why it felt necessary. Malcolm suggested assigning security nearby. Marcus refused immediately. If he truly wanted freedom, he could not bring pieces of his old life with him. Malcolm reminded him about the empire he had built. Companies, investments, thousands of employees, years of sacrifice. Marcus looked through the window as the city slowly disappeared behind them. He explained that he was not running away from something. He was moving toward something. Malcolm asked what exactly he expected to find. Marcus answered honestly, he did not know. The uncertainty unsettled Malcolm more than anything else. Hours passed. The landscape transformed gradually. Concrete gave way to open fields. Massive buildings disappeared behind endless stretches of green land. Small houses replaced luxury towers. The air felt cleaner. The sky seemed larger. Marcus rolled down the window and breathed deeply. It felt different. It felt real. By afternoon, they reached a small coastal community. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the shoreline. Wooden fishing boats rested against the sand. Men repaired nets beneath the sun. Children chased one another through narrow pathways. The entire place felt alive in a way Marcus had forgotten existed. The SUV stopped near the entrance to the village. Neither man moved immediately. The moment felt heavier than expected. Malcolm reminded him that he could still change his mind. Marcus shook his head. This was exactly where he needed to be. After a final goodbye, the vehicle drove away. No crowd gathered. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. For the first time in decades, Marcus Ellington stood completely unnoticed. The realization felt strangely liberating. The village observed him cautiously. Children paused their games, women whispered quietly. Men watched him with suspicion. He understood immediately that attention here carried a different meaning. In the city, people saw opportunity. Here they saw uncertainty. Marcus approached several fishermen sitting beside tangled nets. He greeted them politely. Nobody responded at first. Finally, an older fisherman with sharp eyes spoke. The man observed Marcus carefully before stating the obvious. He was not from there. Marcus admitted it. The fisherman then asked what he wanted. Marcus answered with a single word: work. The response surprised everyone. Several fishermen laughed openly. One man looked at Marcus and asked if he was serious. Marcus remained calm. He was completely serious. The older fisherman stepped closer and grabbed Marcus's hand. The contrast was obvious immediately. Marcus carried soft hands untouched by physical labor. The fisherman released him and told him to return wherever he came from. Marcus insisted he could learn. The fisherman claimed he would quit. Marcus promised otherwise. The exchange continued until the older man finally asked his name. Marcus hesitated. His real name carried power and history. It carried expectations. That was exactly what he wanted to escape. So he chose another name: Mason. The word felt unfamiliar, yet strangely freeing. The fisherman introduced himself as Elijah. He explained that the ocean did not care about status or background. It only respected strength and endurance. Then he offered a challenge. If Mason truly wanted work, he needed to arrive before sunrise the following morning. Late arrivals would not be welcomed. That night, Marcus rented a small room near the shore. The structure was old, the bed was thin, warm air filled the space. There was no luxury, no climate control, no city noise, only distant waves and genuine silence. Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For years, every evening had ended with phone calls, meetings, and responsibilities. Tonight, there was nothing. No demands, no pressure, no expectations. Instead of discomfort, he felt peace. Before dawn, loud knocking shook the door. Elijah's voice called for him outside. Marcus sat upright immediately. Reality returned. This was no longer an experiment. This was his life now. The village already bustled with activity despite the darkness. Lanterns glowed softly. Boats creaked against the shore. The smell of salt water filled the cool air. Elijah waited beside a fishing boat with folded arms. Marcus arrived on time. Elijah nodded once and pointed toward the vessel. No welcoming speech followed. No encouragement, just work. Marcus climbed aboard awkwardly. Several fishermen laughed when he nearly lost his balance. The embarrassment stung. Still, he remained determined. Soon the boat moved away from shore. The ocean expanded endlessly around them. Waves lifted and dropped the vessel unpredictably. Marcus gripped the side tightly. Elijah noticed immediately and instructed him to relax. Fighting the movement would only make things worse. Then Elijah handed him a fishing net and ordered him to throw it. Marcus stared blankly. He had no idea how. Elijah demonstrated effortlessly. The net spread perfectly across the water before sinking beneath the surface. Marcus attempted the same motion. The result was disastrous. The net tangled immediately and collapsed beside the boat. Laughter exploded around him. Someone called him a city boy. Marcus clenched his jaw and tried again, then again, then again. Each attempt improved slightly. None were successful. By sunrise, his arms burned, his hands blistered, his pride suffered repeated attacks. Yet beneath the frustration, something unexpected emerged. Determination. For the first time in years, failure challenged him. The challenge felt strangely satisfying. When the boat finally returned to shore, Marcus staggered onto the sand completely exhausted. Every muscle hurt. His hands were raw, his body felt broken. Yet deep inside, he felt something he had not experienced for years. He felt alive. As he sat alone near the water, catching his breath, a voice interrupted his thoughts. The speaker was a young woman carrying a basket filled with smoked fish. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Her expression revealed immediate honesty. She glanced at the fishing net beside him and smiled. Then she informed him that he was doing everything wrong. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The confidence in her voice caught him off guard. She stepped closer and observed him carefully. Unlike everyone in his former world, she showed no interest in status. No admiration, no calculation, only curiosity. When she asked him to demonstrate his technique, he complied. She watched for several seconds before delivering her verdict. Terrible. Marcus almost laughed, despite his exhaustion. The woman smiled wider. Then she offered to teach him properly. As the sun climbed higher over the ocean, Marcus accepted her offer. He had no idea that this simple conversation would become the beginning of the most important relationship of his life. And as she introduced herself as Naomi, something inside him shifted unexpectedly. For the first time since leaving the city, the future felt uncertain in a completely different way. The sea possessed its own language. Mason was beginning to understand that truth. He could not control the ocean. Nobody could. Yet he slowly learned how to listen. The rhythm of waves, the warning carried by shifting winds, the subtle movements beneath the surface. Every lesson demanded patience. Every mistake demanded humility. The same could be said about the changes taking place inside him. Several days had passed since his arrival. His hands no longer looked like those of a wealthy executive. Small cuts covered his fingers. Healing blisters lined his palms. His shoulders ached constantly. The sun had darkened his skin. The man who stepped from the SUV felt increasingly distant. Yet he was not fully Mason either. He still existed somewhere between two worlds. One morning, sunlight spilled across the shoreline in shades of gold. Fishing boats returned from the early catch. Gulls circled overhead. The village came alive with voices, laughter, bargaining, and daily routines. Mason sat alone on an overturned crate, struggling with a tangled fishing net. He worked carefully but slowly. Progress remained frustratingly difficult. A familiar voice interrupted him. Naomi stood nearby, balancing a basket of smoked fish effortlessly. Morning light illuminated her face. Her confidence seemed natural rather than forced. She watched him struggle for several moments before shaking her head. Once again, she informed him he was doing everything wrong. Mason pretended not to hear. Naomi immediately noticed. She accused him of ignoring her. That finally earned a response. Mason looked up calmly and suggested he enjoyed doing things incorrectly. Naomi laughed softly and crouched beside him. Within seconds, her hands untangled knots that had frustrated him for nearly 15 minutes. She explained exactly where he continued making mistakes. Mason leaned closer and observed carefully. Her movements carried experience. She understood the work completely. He asked whether she enjoyed proving herself right. Naomi smiled without hesitation. She explained that confidence became necessary when the world rarely made room for uncertainty. Something about her answer lingered in his thoughts. It sounded less like arrogance and more like wisdom earned through hardship. Mason studied her quietly. Naomi immediately noticed. She accused him of staring again. He responded by claiming he was simply observing. Her expression changed slightly. She suggested that someone needed to observe new arrivals carefully, especially those pretending to be something they were not. The comment struck closer than she realized. Mason's fingers tightened around the net. He insisted he was not pretending. Naomi did not argue. Instead, she handed the repaired net back to him and instructed him to throw it properly. Mason followed her directions. This time the net spread wider, cleaner, stronger, not perfect but improved. Naomi watched carefully before offering reluctant approval. It was the closest thing to praise he had received from her. From that day forward, Naomi became a constant presence in his life. Not because either one sought it deliberately. Their paths simply crossed repeatedly. At the market, along the shoreline, near the boats. Every encounter led to another conversation. Every conversation revealed another layer. One hot afternoon, Mason returned from fishing completely exhausted. The catch had been disappointing. Tempers among the fishermen remained strained. He wandered toward the market hoping to find food and rest. There he found Naomi arranging smoked fish behind her wooden stall. The scent filled the air. Customers moved around her constantly. Some bargained, others purchased quickly. Naomi handled every interaction with confidence and efficiency. Mason leaned against a nearby post and watched quietly. Without looking up, Naomi accused him of staring once again. Mason admitted she always seemed to notice. Naomi responded that she noticed everything. That answer somehow felt true. Their conversation shifted toward her fish. Mason questioned whether they deserved their reputation. Naomi immediately defended them. She insisted they were the finest in the village. Mason challenged her confidence playfully. Naomi refused to convince him. According to her, people either recognized quality or they did not. Intrigued, Mason bought a piece and tasted it. The fish was excellent. Still, he deliberately hid his reaction. Naomi noticed immediately. When he described it as merely acceptable, she snatched it back without warning. Mason burst into genuine laughter. Naomi remained completely serious. If he disliked it, he could purchase elsewhere. Eventually, he admitted the truth. The fish was excellent. Only then did she return it. Their growing comfort with one another felt natural. Neither acknowledged it aloud. Neither needed to. Later that evening, the village slowed beneath a sky painted orange and pink. Mason walked along the shoreline, enjoying the cooler air. He discovered Naomi standing alone near the water. Her bare feet rested in the sand. Her attention remained fixed on the horizon. For once, she looked quiet, thoughtful, almost vulnerable. Mason approached carefully. He observed that she seemed unusually silent. Naomi replied that he seemed equally quiet. Together they watched the waves roll toward shore. She commented that the ocean felt different at sunset, calmer, resting. Mason suggested it might simply be preparing for tomorrow. Naomi glanced at him thoughtfully. She accused him of always looking ahead. Mason admitted old habits remained difficult to break. The conversation gradually shifted toward him. Naomi explained that he spoke differently than most villagers. He seemed to think before every word. Mason asked whether that bothered her. Naomi answered honestly, not bothered, curious. Then came the question he had feared. Why had he come there? Mason repeated his prepared answer. He needed a change. Naomi immediately rejected it. According to her, nobody traveled so far merely for change. People came because they were running toward something or away from something. Mason asked what she believed he was doing. Naomi studied him carefully before answering. She believed he was hiding. The word lingered heavily between them. Mason held her gaze. Then he quietly asked what would happen if she were right. Naomi looked directly into his eyes. Whatever he was hiding from would eventually find him. The statement unsettled him because deep down he knew it was true. As darkness approached, Naomi prepared to leave. Mason told her he would see her tomorrow. Naomi hesitated briefly before smiling. She agreed. After she disappeared into the fading light, Mason remained alone by the water. Her words echoed repeatedly inside his mind. She saw more than anyone else in the village. More importantly, she saw more than he wanted anyone to see. Yet despite the danger, he found himself drawn toward her honesty. For years, everyone around him had hidden their true intentions behind polished smiles. Naomi did the opposite. She said exactly what she believed. She challenged him without hesitation. She expected nothing from him except sincerity. As waves rolled gently across the shoreline, Mason realized something unexpected. He no longer thought about boardrooms. He no longer thought about investors. He no longer thought about wealth. Instead, he found himself thinking about Naomi. And that realization felt far more dangerous than any secret he carried. Because for the first time since leaving everything behind, he was beginning to care about someone whose opinion mattered. And if she ever learned the truth, he feared losing far more than his disguise. By the second week, the ocean no longer felt like an enemy. It still challenged Mason every day. It still tested his patience, strength, and endurance. Yet it had stopped rejecting him completely. In the world of fishermen, that counted as progress. Each morning began before dawn. The village awakened beneath a blanket of darkness, while lanterns flickered like distant stars. Men prepared boats with quiet efficiency. Nets were checked, supplies were gathered. The salty air carried the promise of another long day. Mason rose with everyone else. His muscles protested every movement. His hands remained sore, yet he no longer dreaded the work. In fact, he welcomed it. There was honesty in exhaustion. There was dignity in effort. Those were things his former life rarely offered. Elijah noticed the changes. He rarely gave compliments. Approval from him came in smaller forms, a nod, a glance, a shorter criticism. For Elijah, that was praise. One morning, rough winds greeted them as they pushed away from shore. The waves rolled harder than usual. Several fishermen complained under their breath. Elijah merely adjusted his stance and continued working. Mason followed his example. Hours later, after wrestling with heavy nets and unpredictable currents, he successfully cast a perfect spread across the water. The movement felt natural, instinctive. Elijah watched silently before giving a single approving grunt. That small sound filled Mason with surprising pride. He had spent years chasing billion-dollar victories. Somehow this simple acknowledgement felt more meaningful. By midday, the fishermen returned with a respectable catch. The village welcomed them with familiar noise and activity. Children ran between boats. Vendors called to customers. Conversations filled the air. As soon as Mason stepped onto shore, his eyes searched automatically for one person. Naomi stood near her stall, arranging smoked fish beneath a cloth canopy. Sunlight danced across her face. When she noticed him approaching, she crossed her arms and pretended not to smile. Mason immediately recognized the act. Naomi informed him that he still looked terrible. Mason laughed. According to her, surviving another day at sea did not qualify as an accomplishment. She insisted his standards remained far too low. Their conversation flowed easily now. The awkwardness that once existed between them had disappeared. Teasing became natural. So did the comfort. Naomi's stall appeared different that afternoon. The arrangement looked fuller and more inviting. Mason recognized several suggestions he had offered earlier. Naomi reluctantly admitted that customers responded positively to the changes. Sales had improved. Not dramatically, but enough to matter. Mason felt pleased. Naomi, however, refused to grant him too much satisfaction. She reminded him repeatedly that one successful suggestion did not make him an expert. Later that evening, Naomi invited him to walk along a quieter section of shoreline. She did not ask directly. She simply started walking and expected him to follow. Mason understood immediately. Together they moved beyond the crowded village paths. The ocean stretched endlessly beside them. The sand remained smooth and untouched. The noise of daily life faded into the distance. Naomi explained that she often came there when she needed space to think. Mason understood the feeling. Sometimes silence revealed more than conversation ever could. They sat beside one another and watched waves roll toward shore. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Neither felt pressured to fill it. Eventually, Naomi broke the quiet. She asked whether he missed wherever he had come from. The question surprised him. Mason considered it carefully. Images flashed through his mind. Luxury towers, private jets, endless meetings, expensive parties. None of them stirred longing. He answered honestly, "No." Naomi seemed skeptical, not even a little. Mason shook his head. Life there had become complicated beyond reason. Here things felt simpler. Naomi smiled faintly. Simpler did not always mean easier. Mason agreed. Still, simplicity offered a kind of freedom he had never experienced before. The conversation shifted again. Naomi admitted she once imagined life would be different. Bigger, more exciting, easier. Reality had not cooperated with those dreams. Instead, responsibility arrived early and stayed. Mason listened carefully. He noticed how rarely she spoke about herself. When she did, every word carried weight. Then Naomi asked a question that caught him completely off guard. What made him happy? Mason stared at the ocean for several seconds. The answer should have been easy. Years ago, he would have spoken about success, growth, achievement, wealth. Yet none of those answers felt true anymore. Finally, he admitted he did not know. Naomi looked genuinely surprised. Mason explained that he once believed he understood happiness. Now he realized he had confused accomplishment with fulfillment. Naomi seemed pleased by his honesty. According to her, learning again was not a weakness. It was growth. The statement stayed with him. As they continued walking, their hands brushed accidentally. Then again. Neither immediately pulled away. The simple contact created unexpected tension. Not discomfort, awareness. Naomi eventually stopped walking and turned toward him. She admitted that he was unlike anyone she had ever known. Mason responded with a smile. He hoped that was a good thing. Naomi nodded. It was. She explained that he listened. truly listened. Most people waited for their turn to speak. Mason paid attention instead. Hearing that affected him more than she realized. In his previous life, nobody had ever complimented him for listening. They praised intelligence, leadership, strategy, wealth, never kindness. The sun drifted lower across the horizon. Golden light painted the ocean surface. The moment felt strangely perfect. Then Naomi asked another question. Why had he stayed? Mason understood what she really meant. He could have left after the difficult days, after the failures, after the storms and ridicule. Yet he remained. Naomi wanted to know why. Mason took a slow breath. This time he answered without hesitation. Because of her. The words settled heavily between them. Naomi looked away first. Her composure cracked slightly. For once, she seemed uncertain. She reminded him that he barely knew her. Mason stepped closer. He quietly explained that sometimes people recognized something important before fully understanding it. Naomi struggled to respond. The air between them felt different now, more vulnerable, more honest. Mason promised nothing. He demanded nothing. He simply told her that he intended to stay. The statement carried more meaning than either acknowledged aloud. Eventually, Naomi whispered a quiet response. Okay. It was not a confession. It was not a promise. Yet it felt significant. As darkness settled over the shoreline, they walked back toward the village together. Something had changed. Trust had begun taking root between them. Small, fragile, real, but while affection continued growing stronger, another feeling grew alongside it. Fear. Every day, Mason remained silent about his true identity. The secret became heavier. Naomi trusted him more with each passing conversation. That trust felt precious. It also felt dangerous. Because deep inside, Mason knew one painful truth. The longer he waited to reveal who he really was, the harder the inevitable fallout would become. And for the first time in many years, he feared losing something that money could never replace. The village woke beneath an unusual silence. Mason noticed it immediately. Normally, the shoreline buzzed with energy before sunrise. Fishermen joked while preparing boats. Vendors arranged goods. Children chased one another through narrow paths. That morning felt different. Conversations were shorter. Faces appeared more serious. Even the ocean seemed strangely distant. Elijah worked quietly beside the boat. The other fishermen avoided unnecessary words. Mason eventually asked what was wrong. Elijah answered with a single word. Life. The response explained nothing, yet Mason had already learned that people there often communicated through observation rather than explanation. Answers revealed themselves to those willing to pay attention. The fishing trip proved disappointing. The catch was small. Nobody complained openly. The silence said enough. By the time they returned to shore, tension lingered among the fishermen like a shadow. Mason helped drag the boat onto the sand before looking toward the market. Naomi's stall stood empty. Immediately he felt concern. Her table remained untouched. No baskets, no fish, no sign of her. One of the village elders noticed his attention. When Mason asked about Naomi, the woman's expression softened. She explained that Naomi's mother had become worse. Some days the older woman could sit comfortably. Other days she struggled even to speak. Today was one of the difficult days. Mason did not stop to think. He simply moved. Naomi's house stood near the edge of the village where the shoreline curved inward. The small structure looked fragile against the ocean wind. Weathered wood formed the walls, rusted metal patched sections of the roof. It carried the appearance of a home that had endured hardship for many years. Mason hesitated briefly before knocking. No response came. He knocked again, still nothing. Just as he prepared to leave, the door opened slowly. Naomi stood there. The sight unsettled him. She looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Her usual confidence seemed buried beneath worry. Loose strands of hair framed her face. Her shoulders carried visible strain. Mason explained that he had not seen her at the market. Naomi nodded quietly. She had stayed home. When he mentioned hearing about her mother, she looked away. The concern in her expression revealed everything. Mason asked whether he could help. Naomi studied him carefully. Then she stepped aside. Inside, the room remained dim despite daylight outside. A single window allowed soft light to enter. The furnishings were simple. A narrow bed occupied one corner. A worn chair rested near the wall. Everything appeared clean, despite obvious limitations. On the bed lay Naomi's mother. The older woman looked fragile. Her breathing remained shallow. Her face appeared pale and tired. Mason instinctively lowered his voice. Naomi adjusted a blanket gently across her mother's shoulders. She explained that the illness had been present for years. It began slowly before steadily worsening. Mason asked whether doctors had been consulted. Naomi laughed softly. The sound contained no humor. Medical treatment required money. Money required opportunities they did not possess. Mason immediately felt the weight of his secret. In his former life, solving problems like this required a simple phone call. Resources were unlimited. Solutions arrived instantly. Here he could do nothing without revealing who he truly was. The realization frustrated him deeply. He carefully suggested finding help. Naomi shook her head. She had heard promises before. Many people claimed they would help. Most never returned. Mason insisted he was different. Naomi responded that everyone said the same thing. The room fell silent. The truth hurt because it carried experience. Eventually, Mason stopped trying to solve the situation. Instead, he stayed. He carried water, tidied the room, assisted with simple tasks. He listened more than he spoke. Naomi noticed. Though she rarely mentioned it, she appreciated the effort. Hours passed. Late in the afternoon, Naomi's mother stirred awake. Her eyes opened slowly. Naomi immediately moved closer and took her hand. The older woman recognized her daughter instantly. Then her attention shifted toward Mason. In a weak voice, she asked who he was. Naomi introduced him simply as Mason, a fisherman. The older woman studied him briefly before smiling faintly. Then she said something unexpected. Good people mattered. Naomi needed good people around her. The words affected both of them. Naomi's eyes glistened. Mason lowered his gaze. As evening approached, he stepped outside to give them privacy. The sunset painted the sky with brilliant colors, yet the beauty felt muted by the emotions of the day. A few minutes later, Naomi joined him. Together they stood overlooking the water. She surprised him by mentioning that her mother liked him. Mason laughed softly. They had barely spoken. Naomi disagreed. According to her, people often recognized character faster than words could reveal it. The conversation drifted toward more personal territory. Naomi admitted she once believed strongly in love. Mason sensed pain behind the statement. There had been someone before, a man from outside the village, someone who arrived with promises and good intentions. Naomi had trusted him completely. Eventually he left. When life became difficult, he disappeared. He never returned. Mason listened carefully. Every word deepened his understanding of her. The experience explained her caution. It explained her reluctance to trust. It explained why honesty mattered so much. Naomi eventually turned toward him. Her expression became serious. If he carried secrets, they needed to be the kind that would not make him disappear someday. The statement struck him like a physical blow. Mason wanted to explain everything. He wanted to tell her who he really was. Yet fear held him back. Instead, he promised he was not going anywhere. Naomi answered honestly. He could not make that promise. Life changed too quickly. People changed too quickly. Mason eventually settled on a different answer. He would try. Naomi accepted that. Trying, she said, was at least a beginning. The sun disappeared beneath the horizon. Darkness slowly covered the shoreline. Their connection felt deeper than before. Not because of romance, not because of attraction, because of vulnerability. Naomi had shared a painful piece of her history. Mason had revealed a piece of his heart. Yet as they stood together beneath the evening sky, one truth remained unavoidable. Naomi had once trusted someone who left. Mason carried a secret capable of creating the exact same wound. And neither of them understood how costly that truth would eventually become. As waves rolled gently across the shore, Mason felt a growing unease. The life he had built there felt increasingly precious, which meant losing it would hurt more than he had ever imagined. The air changed before the sky did. Mason sensed it the moment he stepped outside before dawn. The breeze felt heavier than usual. The familiar freshness carried an uneasy weight. Around him, the village moved with unusual urgency. Fishermen prepared boats faster than normal. Women gathered supplies without lingering conversations. Children remained close to their homes instead of racing through the sandy paths. Something was coming. Elijah stood beside the boat with a serious expression. He instructed everyone to move quickly. They would fish and return immediately. Mason looked toward the horizon. The sky still appeared calm. A faint dark line rested far in the distance. Elijah followed his gaze. A storm was approaching. Mason questioned why they were going out at all. Elijah's answer came without hesitation. If they did not fish, they did not eat. The discussion ended there. The ocean seemed peaceful when they first launched, too peaceful. Mason sat quietly, gripping the fishing net. Several fishermen exchanged uneasy glances. One remarked that the silence before trouble often felt worse than trouble itself. Mason understood exactly what he meant. The first catches came quickly. Nets filled faster than expected. Everyone worked with urgency. Time suddenly felt valuable. Every minute mattered. Mason moved faster than he ever had before. His hands responded instinctively. His body adjusted naturally to the boat's motion. Elijah noticed. Once again, he said nothing. Then everything changed. A powerful gust struck the boat without warning. The vessel lurched sharply sideways. Several fishermen grabbed the rails. Nets whipped through the air. The ocean surface transformed instantly. Calm water became restless. Waves began rising higher. The dark line on the horizon expanded rapidly. Pull everything in. Elijah's voice cut through the growing wind. Men rushed to obey. Mason worked alongside them. The sky darkened as though someone had drawn a curtain across the sun. Rain clouds rolled forward with frightening speed. Mason's heartbeat accelerated. This storm felt different from anything he had experienced before. The ocean no longer seemed challenging. It seemed dangerous. The engine roared as Elijah turned the boat toward shore, but the sea had already changed its mind. Massive waves slammed against the side. Water spilled across the deck. Wind screamed through the air. Mason struggled to maintain balance. Every movement required concentration. One violent wave nearly knocked him down. Elijah grabbed his arm and pulled him upright. Then he reminded Mason of an important lesson. Fighting the ocean only led to disaster. Mason steadied himself and adjusted. Instead of resisting the movement, he moved with it. Meanwhile, the village prepared for the storm. Naomi stood near the shoreline staring toward the horizon. Wind whipped her hair across her face. Villagers called for her to seek shelter. She ignored them. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant fishing boats rising and falling between growing waves. Fear tightened inside her chest. The boats looked impossibly small against the approaching storm. Then the rain arrived. Heavy sheets of water crashed from the sky. Visibility disappeared almost instantly. The ocean roared with terrifying power. Out on the water, Elijah's boat fought toward shore. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the storm. One of the smaller fishing boats nearby tilted dangerously. Two men clung desperately to its side. Water poured into the vessel. Panic spread among the fishermen. If the boat overturned, the men would not survive. Elijah made a decision immediately. He ordered their boat toward the struggling fishermen. Several men protested. The shoreline remained far away. Conditions worsened every second. Elijah ignored every objection. Lives mattered more than convenience. The rescue became chaos. Waves hammered both boats repeatedly. Men shouted through the wind. One fisherman reached toward the stranded men, but missed. Another wave nearly separated the vessels completely. Mason saw one of the struggling fishermen lose his grip. Without thinking, he moved. Someone shouted a warning. Mason ignored it. He lunged forward and caught the man's arm just before he disappeared beneath the water. The force nearly pulled Mason overboard. For one terrifying moment, both men seemed destined for the ocean. Then other fishermen grabbed Mason and hauled them back. Another man still remained trapped. The storm intensified. Logic suggested retreat. Mason moved again. This time he reached farther. The second fisherman caught his wrist. Their grip slipped once, then tightened. Working together, the crew finally dragged him aboard. The rescue succeeded. Barely. The journey back felt endless. Every wave threatened disaster. Every minute stretched painfully long. Yet eventually the shoreline emerged through the rain. Naomi spotted them first. Relief surged through the crowd. Villagers rushed toward the water. When the boat finally slammed against the sand, exhausted fishermen jumped out immediately. Mason stumbled onto shore. His legs felt unstable. His clothes were soaked. His body trembled from exhaustion. Voices surrounded him. Some called him brave, others called him foolish. He barely heard any of them. His attention focused entirely on Naomi. She stood several steps away. Rain dripped from her hair. Her face looked pale. Her eyes searched him anxiously. Slowly she approached. For several seconds neither spoke. The storm continued around them. Yet everything between them felt strangely still. Finally, Naomi found her voice. She told him he could have died. Mason answered honestly, so could the men they rescued. Naomi glanced toward the fishermen whose lives had been saved. Then she looked back at Mason. Something changed inside her expression. Until that moment she had viewed him as an outsider, a stranger trying to become part of their world. Now she saw something else. She saw someone willing to risk himself for others. Someone whose actions matched his words. Naomi admitted that she had been wrong about him. Mason felt relief mixed with guilt, because despite earning her trust, he still carried the truth she did not know. Later that night, after the storm finally weakened, Naomi found him sitting alone near the shoreline. The ocean had calmed considerably. Moonlight reflected softly across the water. She sat beside him. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Naomi thanked him. Mason seemed surprised. She explained that his actions had reminded her something important. Good people still existed, people who did not run when circumstances became difficult. The words struck him deeply. They touched the exact fear he carried inside. Mason promised once again that he was not going anywhere. Naomi smiled softly. This time she believed him. The trust in her eyes felt beautiful. It also felt terrifying, because Mason knew another storm waited beyond the horizon. Not one made of rain and wind, a storm made of truth. And when that storm finally arrived, saving himself would be far more difficult than saving anyone from the ocean. The storm left more than broken nets and damaged boats behind. It changed the village. Conversations felt warmer. People greeted one another with greater appreciation. The reminder of how fragile life could be lingered in every smile and every handshake. Storms had a way of stripping away unnecessary things. What remained was what truly mattered. Mason felt the difference immediately. Villagers who once viewed him with suspicion now greeted him by name. Fishermen who had laughed at his mistakes now nodded with respect. Even Elijah seemed less distant. One morning, while preparing nets beside the shore, Elijah approached him quietly. The older fisherman studied him for several seconds before speaking. Mason expected criticism. Instead, Elijah surprised him. He said that Mason had earned his place. The simple statement carried enormous weight. Mason lowered his eyes briefly. He still had much to learn. Elijah agreed. Learning never ended. Yet there was one thing more important than skill. Mason had stayed. When danger arrived, he had not run. In Elijah's world, that mattered more than anything. The fishing trip that day felt lighter. The ocean remained calm. The catch proved respectable. For the first time since arriving, Mason found himself working without constantly proving something. He simply worked. The difference felt liberating. When the boats returned to shore, his eyes instinctively searched for Naomi. She stood behind her stall, arranging fish beneath the morning sunlight. The moment she saw him, her expression softened. A genuine smile appeared before she could hide it. Mason noticed immediately. Naomi accused him of arriving late. Mason laughed and pointed out that they had only just returned. According to Naomi, that still qualified as late. Their exchange drew amused looks from nearby villagers. Neither seemed to care. Something between them had become visible. Not because they announced it, because everyone could see it. Later, when business slowed, Naomi surprised him again. She invited him to walk with her. No explanation followed. She simply picked up a basket and started moving. Mason followed without hesitation. They traveled beyond the market and beyond the fishing boats. Eventually, they reached a quiet section of beach hidden from the rest of the village. The shoreline curved gently there. Crystal water rolled onto untouched sand. The sound of daily life faded completely. Naomi explained that this place belonged to her. Not officially, emotionally. It was where she came whenever life became overwhelming. Mason understood immediately. Everyone needed somewhere to breathe. They sat together facing the ocean. The afternoon sun reflected brilliantly across the waves. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence felt peaceful. Naomi eventually asked whether he missed his old life. The question caught him off guard again. Mason considered it carefully. Images appeared in his mind. Luxury vehicles, penthouse views, corporate meetings, private events attended by influential people. None of them stirred longing. He answered honestly, no. Naomi studied him closely. She believed him. That surprised him more than the question itself. Then Naomi shared something personal. As a child, she imagined a larger future. She imagined adventure, travel, excitement. Instead, responsibility arrived early. Caring for her mother became her reality. Running the fish stall became her reality. Survival became her reality. Yet despite everything, she did not sound bitter. There was sadness. There was exhaustion. But there was also strength. Mason admired that deeply. Their conversation drifted naturally from dreams to happiness. Naomi asked what truly made him happy now. This time, his answer arrived more quickly. Moments like this, honest conversations, shared laughter, simple work, real relationships. Naomi smiled softly. She admitted that his answer sounded different from anything he might have said before arriving. Mason knew she was right. The man he used to be would never have valued such things. As the afternoon continued, their distance gradually disappeared. Their shoulders brushed occasionally. Neither moved away. The comfort between them felt effortless. Eventually, Naomi stopped walking and turned toward him. Her expression became serious. She admitted that she trusted him. The confession carried more weight than any declaration of affection. Trust was not something Naomi offered easily. Mason felt both honored and guilty. He thanked her quietly. Naomi studied him for a long moment, then she admitted something else. She no longer believed he would leave when life became difficult. Those words affected him deeply, more deeply than she realized, because every day he delayed telling the truth. That trust grew stronger. Every smile, every conversation, every shared moment increased the eventual cost. Yet he still could not bring himself to tell her. Fear continued winning the battle. As evening approached, they walked along the shoreline once more. The sky glowed with shades of orange and gold. Their hands brushed repeatedly. Finally, neither pulled away. Fingers intertwined naturally, the gesture felt simple. Yet it changed everything. Naomi looked down briefly before meeting his eyes. For once, neither joked nor teased, neither hid behind playful remarks. The truth existed plainly between them. They cared about each other. Deeply. Mason stepped closer. Naomi did not move away. He told her that staying in the village had changed him. Naomi smiled softly. The village had changed many people. Mason shook his head. This was different. It was not the village. It was her. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly. The confession left them both vulnerable. Neither rushed the moment. Neither tried to define it. Some feelings did not require immediate labels. They simply existed. Eventually, Naomi whispered something that remained with him long afterward. She said she felt safe with him. The word struck harder than any compliment he had ever received. Safe. Throughout his old life, people admired his success. They respected his influence. They feared his power. Nobody had ever described him that way. Safe. As darkness settled across the shoreline, they walked back toward the village together. Villagers smiled knowingly as they passed. Neither denied anything. Neither explained anything. There was no need. Yet beneath the growing happiness, a shadow remained. Mason could feel it every time Naomi looked at him with complete trust. Every time she laughed. Every time she reached for his hand. The secret he carried no longer threatened only him. It threatened them. And somewhere deep inside, he began to understand an unavoidable truth. The longer he waited, the more painful the truth would become. But despite knowing that, he remained silent. And silence, he was slowly learning, often created consequences far greater than lies themselves. The morning began like every other. That was exactly what made it dangerous. The ocean moved peacefully beneath a clear sky. Fishing boats rested along the shoreline. Vendors arranged goods across the market. Children laughed as they chased one another through sandy pathways. Life felt steady, comfortable, predictable. For the first time in many years, Mason allowed himself to believe that perhaps this peace could last. He stood beside Naomi's stall, helping arrange smoked fish for customers. His attempts still lacked her precision. Naomi immediately corrected several placements and accused him of ruining her display. Mason defended himself by claiming he was improving it. Naomi disagreed strongly. Their playful argument continued until laughter interrupted them both. These small moments had become part of their daily routine. They felt natural now, familiar, safe. Then a strange sound drifted across the village. At first it seemed distant, unimportant, yet it grew louder quickly. Engines. Multiple engines. Not fishing boats, not anything local. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. The sound continued growing. Villagers stepped away from stalls and looked toward the main road. Dust rose into the air. Children stopped playing. Even the fishermen paused their work. Something unusual was approaching. Mason felt tension settle immediately in his chest. A line of black vehicles appeared beyond the village entrance. Large SUVs rolled forward slowly, completely out of place against the simple surroundings. The sight alone felt wrong, like two different worlds colliding. Naomi looked toward the approaching vehicles, then she glanced at Mason. Something in his expression caught her attention immediately. His face had changed. The ease disappeared. The calm disappeared. Concern replaced both. The vehicles stopped near the center of the village. Dust swirled around them before settling slowly onto the sand. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then the doors opened. Several men stepped out. Their dark suits contrasted sharply against the village landscape. Their polished shoes looked absurd on the sandy ground. Every detail announced wealth, power, and influence. The exact things Mason had tried to leave behind. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. One man stepped forward from the group, tall, professional, familiar. Mason recognized him instantly. His stomach tightened. Malcolm. The man scanned the crowd methodically. His attention settled on Mason almost immediately. The moment their eyes met, everything changed. Naomi sensed it. Villagers sensed it. The air itself seemed to tighten. Malcolm walked forward with measured confidence. Nobody stopped him. Nobody knew enough to stop him. Mason remained perfectly still. He already knew what was coming. Naomi turned toward him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She asked what was happening. Mason opened his mouth. No words came. Malcolm stopped only a few steps away. For several seconds, he simply stared. He seemed almost surprised by what he saw. The rough hands, the sun-darkened skin, the simple clothes. The version of Marcus Ellington that nobody from his old world would recognize. Finally, Malcolm spoke. The words landed like a thunderclap. Mr. Ellington. Silence exploded across the village. Naomi blinked. Her expression froze completely. Around them, whispers began spreading. Mason closed his eyes briefly. The moment he had feared for weeks had arrived. Malcolm repeated the name clearly. Mr. Marcus Ellington. We have been searching for you everywhere. Naomi stared at Mason as though she had never seen him before. Confusion transformed into disbelief. Then disbelief began transforming into something worse. She asked him to deny it. Her voice trembled. She begged him to tell her it was not true. Mason stepped forward. He wanted to explain. He wanted to say everything. Yet every possible explanation sounded meaningless. Naomi demanded answers. Who was Marcus Ellington? Why was this stranger calling him that? Why did he suddenly look like a completely different person? Mason swallowed hard. Finally, he spoke the truth. His name was Marcus. The words felt heavier than anything he had ever said. Naomi's face hardened instantly. She repeated the name slowly. Then she asked about Ellington. Mason could not avoid it. Yes, that was his surname. The truth settled over the village like a storm cloud. Villagers exchanged shocked glances. Some recognized the name immediately. Others understood from Malcolm's presence alone that Marcus belonged to a world far beyond theirs. Naomi took a step backward. The distance felt far greater than a few feet. She asked whether everything had been a game, an experiment, a joke. Mason denied it immediately. Nothing about them had been a game. Naomi's eyes filled with pain. She reminded him that he had allowed her to believe he was someone else. A fisherman, a struggling outsider, someone like them. Mason tried explaining that the feelings were real. The connection was real. Naomi interrupted him. Feelings did not erase deception. Feelings did not erase lies. Around them, the entire village watched. Nobody spoke. Nobody intervened. They understood that something deeply personal was unfolding. Mason desperately tried to explain why he came. He told Naomi he had been searching for something real, something honest. Naomi asked a question that shattered him completely. Was she simply part of that search? Was she another experience collected by a wealthy man who could leave whenever he wanted? Mason denied it with everything inside him. Naomi had never been an experiment. She had become the most important person in his life. Yet the words no longer carried the same weight. Not after weeks of secrecy, not after weeks of half-truths. Naomi reminded him about the man from her past, the man who arrived with promises before eventually leaving. Mason insisted he was different. Naomi looked directly into his eyes. Then she delivered the one sentence he feared most. He already was not different. The comparison cut deeper than any accusation. Because for the first time, he could not argue. Malcolm attempted to interrupt. Business demanded attention. The board demanded answers. Marcus silenced him immediately. Nothing mattered except Naomi. Yet even that realization arrived too late. Naomi asked him to leave. At first, he thought he misunderstood. Then she repeated it. She needed him gone. Whatever existed between them no longer felt real, not because the feelings were false, because the foundation beneath them had cracked. Marcus stood frozen. Every instinct urged him to fight, to explain, to convince her. Yet one look at her face told him the truth. She was hurt, deeply hurt, and no explanation could erase that pain instantly. Tears filled her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She turned away before he could stop her. Then she walked. Each step carried her farther from him. Marcus remained where he stood. The ocean still moved. The village still breathed. Life continued around him. Yet everything he had built during those weeks shattered in a single afternoon. The storm he feared had finally arrived, and unlike the storm at sea, this one offered no clear path to safety. The village no longer felt the same. Nothing physical had changed. The fishing boats still rested along the shoreline. Waves continued rolling toward the sand. Vendors opened their stalls every morning. Children still laughed beneath the warm sun. Yet something invisible had shifted. The sense of peace Marcus had found there seemed suddenly distant. He stood exactly where Naomi had left him. The black SUVs remained parked nearby. Villagers whispered among themselves. Some stared openly. Others avoided looking at him altogether. The disguise he had worn for weeks was gone. Only the truth remained. Malcolm approached carefully. For the first time since arriving, Marcus looked every bit like the powerful businessman he once was. Not because of his clothes, not because of his appearance, because of the weight suddenly resting on his shoulders. Malcolm quietly reminded him that they needed to leave. The board was demanding answers. Investors were panicking. News outlets had already begun asking questions. Marcus barely listened. His eyes remained fixed on the path Naomi had taken. He could still picture her expression. The hurt, the disappointment, the disbelief. Those emotions haunted him far more than any corporate crisis. Malcolm repeated himself. The situation had become serious. Marcus finally responded. His voice carried authority again, the same authority he had abandoned weeks earlier. He refused to leave. Malcolm fell silent. Even after all these years, he recognized when an argument would accomplish nothing. Marcus turned away and began walking, not toward the waiting vehicles, toward Naomi's house. Every step felt heavier than the last. For the first time in his life, he feared rejection more than failure. When he reached her home, the door was closed. He knocked gently. No answer came. He knocked again. Still silence. Then he called her name. Nothing. Inside the house, Naomi sat beside her mother. She had heard every knock, every word. Tears rested silently on her cheeks. Part of her wanted to open the door immediately. Part of her wanted to hear his explanation. Another part remembered the shock of hearing his real name, remembered realizing that everything she thought she knew about him was incomplete. Marcus remained outside. He explained that he had never intended to hurt her. Naomi closed her eyes. She believed him. That was exactly what made everything harder. If she hated him, moving on would be easier. The problem was that she still cared, deeply. After several minutes, Marcus accepted the silence for what it was. An answer, not the answer he wanted, but an answer nonetheless. Slowly he stepped away from the door. By evening, the SUVs had disappeared. Malcolm eventually convinced Marcus to return temporarily. The city demanded his attention. Problems had multiplied during his absence, yet even as they drove away, Marcus looked back repeatedly. The village grew smaller in the distance. Naomi's house eventually disappeared completely. Something inside him broke when it did. Meanwhile, Naomi remained withdrawn. She stopped visiting the market regularly. She spent most of her time caring for her mother. Villagers noticed the change. Nobody pressured her. Everyone understood heartbreak when they saw it. Days passed slowly. Yet Marcus remained impossible to escape. Every familiar location carried a memory. The shoreline where they walked together. The market where they laughed. The beach where he admitted his feelings. Everywhere she looked, reminders remained. One evening, Naomi's mother noticed her sadness. The older woman quietly asked whether the fisherman had left. Naomi hesitated before answering. It was more complicated than that. Her mother listened patiently. Then she surprised Naomi with unexpected wisdom. People often judged mistakes differently, depending on whether they involved money or feelings. Wealthy people lied. Poor people lied. Successful people lied. Broken people lied. The real question was why. Naomi struggled to respond. Her mother continued gently. Marcus had hidden his name. That was true, yet she asked whether he had hidden his heart. The question lingered long after the conversation ended. Across the state, Marcus found himself trapped inside the world he once controlled effortlessly. Board meetings filled his schedule. Interviews demanded explanations. Lawyers, executives, and investors surrounded him constantly. Everything felt familiar, yet nothing felt right. During one presentation, he suddenly realized he was no longer listening. Charts filled the screen. Profits filled the discussion. None of it mattered. Not compared to a small fishing village. Not compared to a woman who sold smoked fish beside the ocean. Malcolm noticed immediately. After the meeting ended, he approached Marcus privately. The company was stable again. The crisis had passed. Marcus should have felt relieved. Instead, he looked exhausted. Malcolm finally asked the obvious question. Was Naomi worth all of this? Marcus answered without hesitation. Yes. The certainty surprised even him. For years, he had measured value through numbers. Investments, assets, growth. Now, one person outweighed everything. Several weeks later, another surprise arrived. Naomi's mother became critically ill. The village doctor did what he could. It was not enough. Naomi sat beside her mother's bed, terrified. Fear consumed every thought. She had never felt more alone. Then a vehicle appeared outside her house. Not a luxury SUV, not a corporate convoy, just a single truck. When Naomi stepped outside, she froze. Marcus stood there, alone, no assistance, no security, no expensive suit. He looked tired, determined, real. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Marcus explained why he came. Someone from the village had contacted him. He heard about her mother. Naomi's emotions battled inside her. Anger, relief, confusion, hope. Marcus handed her several documents. Arrangements had already been made. Specialists, treatment, transportation, everything necessary. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. He was offering help without conditions, without expectations, without asking forgiveness first. Marcus quietly explained that her mother mattered because Naomi mattered. The simplicity of the statement broke through every wall she had built. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Yet the greatest surprise came next. Marcus apologized, not with excuses, not with explanations, just honesty. He admitted that fear made him selfish. He feared losing the one place where nobody cared about his name. In protecting that secret, he had damaged the very thing he wanted most. Naomi listened silently. For the first time since the truth emerged, she saw no businessman, no billionaire, no stranger. She saw the same man who learned to fish badly, the same man who carried water without being asked, the same man who risked his life during the storm, the same man who stayed. Yet forgiveness remained complicated. Trust remained fragile. As darkness settled over the village, Marcus and Naomi stood facing one another beside the ocean. Neither knew what came next. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since everything fell apart, hope returned. Quiet, fragile, real. And as waves rolled gently across the shore, both understood that the final choice no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to what they would do next. The ocean greeted the morning with calm waters and gentle waves. Sunlight stretched across the horizon like a promise. For the first time in many weeks, neither Marcus nor Naomi felt completely certain about the future. Yet uncertainty no longer felt frightening. It felt honest. They stood together outside Naomi's house while doctors carefully prepared her mother for transportation. The specialists Marcus arranged had arrived before sunrise. Their equipment looked unfamiliar against the simplicity of the village, yet their presence brought something that had been missing for a long time: hope. Naomi watched quietly as her mother received care. Emotion tightened her throat. She had spent years carrying responsibility alone, years believing every burden belonged only to her. Now, for the first time, someone stood beside her instead of simply offering promises. Marcus remained nearby without interfering. He did not attempt to take control. He did not act like a savior. He simply stayed. The gesture mattered more than words. Later that afternoon, after the medical team departed, Naomi walked toward the shoreline. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and sunlight. Marcus followed several steps behind. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar. It reminded them of countless walks before everything changed. Eventually, Naomi stopped and turned toward him. Her eyes searched his face carefully. She admitted that forgiveness was not simple. Trust could not be repaired overnight. Some wounds required time. Marcus nodded. He expected nothing else. He understood that rebuilding something broken demanded patience. Naomi studied him for several moments longer. Then she asked a question. If he could return to the day they first met, would he tell her the truth immediately? Marcus looked toward the ocean before answering. Yes, without hesitation, without fear. He would tell her everything. Not because the truth was easy, because hiding it had cost them both too much. Naomi listened quietly. She believed him. The realization surprised her. Weeks earlier, she would have doubted every word. Now she saw something different: growth, regret, humility. The qualities she valued most had survived beneath the lies. As the days passed, Marcus remained in the village. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to. The city continued functioning without him. Meetings happened. Businesses operated. Investments grew. The empire survived exactly as he once promised. Yet Marcus spent his mornings helping fishermen prepare boats. He spent afternoons assisting wherever he could. He spent evenings walking beside Naomi along the shoreline. Slowly the village adjusted again. Suspicion faded. Conversations returned. Laughter followed. Villagers watched carefully at first. Then they accepted what had become obvious. Marcus was wealthy, powerful, influential. Yet he was also the same man who struggled with fishing nets. The same man who risked himself during a storm. The same man who carried water for an elderly woman without being asked. Over time, those things mattered more than his name. Naomi noticed the change too. People stopped talking about Marcus Ellington, the billionaire. They started talking about Marcus, the person. The distinction meant everything. Several months later, remarkable news arrived. Naomi's mother's condition improved significantly. Recovery remained difficult. Challenges remained ahead. Yet progress existed where none had seemed possible before. The entire village celebrated. Naomi cried openly for the first time in years. Tears of relief replaced tears of fear. Marcus stood beside her through all of it. Not as a hero, not as a provider, as a partner. One evening, as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, Naomi and Marcus returned to the quiet section of beach where they once shared their first honest conversations. The ocean reflected shades of gold and crimson. Waves rolled gently across the sand. Everything felt peaceful. Naomi looked at him and smiled. It was not the hesitant smile of someone uncertain. It was the smile of someone who finally believed again. Marcus admitted that leaving the city had begun as an escape. He thought he was searching for himself. Naomi squeezed his hand gently. Maybe he had been. Marcus smiled. The difference was that he never expected to find something even more important. Naomi raised an eyebrow playfully. And what was that? Marcus looked directly into her eyes. Home. The answer brought tears to Naomi's eyes, not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Home was never the penthouse. It was never the skyline. It was never the fortune. Home was the place where people knew the truth and stayed anyway. Home was trust rebuilt after mistakes. Home was forgiveness earned through action. Home was love strong enough to survive honesty. As darkness settled across the shoreline, Marcus reflected on everything that had changed. He arrived believing wealth had given him everything. Instead, wealth had hidden what truly mattered: purpose, connection, loyalty, love. The village taught him lessons no boardroom ever could. Naomi taught him that vulnerability required greater courage than success. Her mother taught him that character mattered more than reputation. The ocean taught him humility. And through all of it, he finally discovered the answer to the question that once haunted him. What would it feel like to be valued without the weight of his name? The answer stood beside him, holding his hand. Naomi loved him not because of what he owned, not because of what he could provide. She loved him because of who he chose to become. The stars appeared one by one above the ocean. Waves continued their endless rhythm. Life moved forward. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. And for Marcus Ellington, honesty turned out to be the greatest treasure he would ever possess. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, your viewing location, and share this video.